Midnight on Earth podcast with your host, Jake Weaver. Engineered by Cedric Swan. Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Midnight on Earth. I'm your host, Jake Weaver, and we are here to bring you more knowledge, more light, and more love. And yet another incredible guest. Today we have Carl Abrahamsson on the show. He's going to be talking about, well, his life and his most recent book, Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, Life in the Occult Underground. Ooh, that just gives me chills just saying that. You know this is going to be good. We're going to talk to him in just a second, but first I need you to do something for me. Follow me on Instagram at midnight_on_earth. That is the address. You can follow me there. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you go to get your podcasts, click that button that connects us so you know exactly what is going on. You get a notification to your device or wherever you get it, and then boom, you're in the conversation. Lastly, create the connection for me. Tell someone that you know that loves these type of podcasts, or someone that needs good information. You know those people in your life. Bring them here. midnightonearth.com. All right. So we're going to talk to Carl as we always do. We read the bio first. So here we go. Carl Abrahamsson is a writer, publisher, magico-anthropologist, filmmaker, and photographer. Since the mid-1980s, he has been active in the magical community, integrating occulture as a way of life and lecturing about his findings and speculations. The author of several books, including Occulture and Source Magic, and the editor and publisher of the Fenris Wolf, he currently lives in Småland, Sweden. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Småland, Sweden, and he's here with us today. Hello, Carl.
Hello, Jake. Nice to be here. Thank you for that presentation.
Oh my God. Wow. This is, I feel like this is an honor. You're a very magical person. You've had a very magical life, and we're connecting right now. This is super huge. So your book, Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, is really just about your life. It's really just your life story of how you became an awakened teenager early on and then kept pursuing that all the way up until now. Why were you so attracted to this energy?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think in retrospect, I can only speculate because, memory fails. And I mean, that was one of the key takeaways from working with the book was, well, I say having to go through my diaries as if it were a chore. It was just wonderful to actually delve into that. And I started writing a diary around 1987 when I was about 21. So from there on, it's pretty much documented. I was already awakened then, I'd say. So if we zoom back a little bit to the teenage years, I would say in part, normal teenage stuff. You want to separate from your peers, from your parents, create your own stuff, but at the same time you are kind of in the same mold, right? So I come from a very intellectual home with lots of art and books and stuff like that. So of course it was like a no-brainer that I would become something like that too. Yet at that time I wanted to sort of create my own, listen to good music that I liked, no one else liked, movies. I've always been against the grain in a way. But that's the kind of normal stuff, right?
Sure.
And then as a teenager, and like I said, against the grain of sort of, certainly not socially awkward, but I prefer to be, on my own, indulge in the stuff and the culture that I really loved, whether it be comic books or music or weird movies, whatever, I prefer that to, I don't know, social banalities. So again, you try to find yourself, of course. Who are you? What do you want to do with your life? And I'd felt this sort of allure of culture in general because of my upbringing, or thanks to my upbringing, and also my own initial researches about that. So at the same time, a part of this individuation process is also about, empowering. How can I empower myself? Because when you're a teenager, you're kind of lost. And it was a beautiful thing in Stockholm. There were actually a couple of great occult bookstores, even in fairly tiny Stockholm. And when I went in there, of course, you see Crowley, you see Anton LaVey, you see the Golden Dawn stuff, sort of these classical books. And some books sort of spoke to me, others didn't. So, of course, I went to those who spoke to me from the shelf in a way. And it was usually the darker stuff, the heavier duty magical stuff. And, of course, initially, I didn't really understand it. LaVey was kind of easy, but Crowley was more complicated. However, I felt a great affinity with Crowley from the point of view of how he led his life. So there's another kind of gelling, right? Magic is about a kind of technology. It's an art form, art and science of creating change in conformity with will, or, what Crowley said. But it's also about how you live your life and how you allow for an intuitive both influx and outflux to shape your life. And of course, it requires will. And will is something that you can only hone or chisel out. It's not something you can buy. It's not something you can, get wholesale. So I think I was open to the fact that this is powerful stuff, but not in any way in a negative way. I felt it as this kind of empowering tool, whatever it was. I sort of was so hungry for information. So if we stop there for a bit and go even further back, like I write in the introduction to the book, I think it started early on, actually right when I was born, because of the fact that my father at that time, mid-60s, ran a jazz club in Stockholm called Golden Circle, right?
Which is so huge. So, that's legendary.
Yeah, I know. And actually, so basically what happened was that right before I was born, we're talking about a couple of days before, Ornette Coleman was in town to play at the club. And he came by my parents' apartment and had bought me my cradle to be. He bought a cradle for me. So that's, the old saying, the hand that rocks the cradle, etc. He didn't actually rock it, but he provided the cradle. So in retrospect, things like that I did not appreciate as a teenager because it was jazz and it was my father's thing, But in retrospect, it was just amazingly cool. And I think that if you symbolically integrate that in the entire life story, I began by being rocked in a way by outsider, experimental kind of genius artist who was part of a scene where my parents were involved, and it was very open-minded, very cutting edge, So in a way, even though I intellectually could not take that in at age 0, I was certainly exposed to it. And I think those things have shaped me. Especially, the past 2 decades, what I've truly integrated how cool it actually is.
Well, I think it's very interesting, Carl. I just want to point out that jazz itself was considered by some religious authorities as the devil's music, which then led you into a life of pursuing these things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, if we zoom back, then let's zoom forward to teenage years again, and this initial kind of research or reading of the basic material, LaVey, Crowley, Golden Dawn. It was very, very empowering. And I didn't immediately start doing rituals. I just felt like there was fodder there that I resonated with, as in the same way as certain movies resonated with me, certain artists or actors or bands. And at this time, there was also, now we're talking early 1980s. There's this beautiful musical scene called the industrial music scene or culture, which was so filled with intellectual and also occult references, meaning that these bands and pioneering musicians, they built their music not merely on music to make music, but they built it also on intellectual and magical fodder. And one of these sort of really pioneering people was Genesis P-Orridge, who at this time had the band Psychick TV, and also the actual magical order or group, the Temple of Psychic Youth. And I started sort of parallel to all my reading of stuff, I started subscribing to information from Topi, as it was called, the Temple of Psychic Youth. And I just felt such an incredible resonance with it because it was not arcane, right? It was right there in contemporary times, integrating contemporary things like contemporary science, contemporary culture, and also important, integrating culture in the magical environment. Whereas before it had basically been like a pretty strict technology coming from the Corpus Hermeticum and, you know, some stuff from the East, some stuff from the West, but it was just all about causality. Then you do this and then that happens. It's like Mickey Mouse as the Sorcerer's Apprentice in Fantasia. Right. You know, you do the thing, but you have to do it right, otherwise it goes overboard. But Topi was very interesting because it was all about carrying on a tradition of individuality, you know, individual liberty in a way, but it was also creating or concocting a totally pragmatic magical stew for people today. Another parallel to that would be the IoT, you know, the chaos magicians that sort of sparked out of the UK and then spread all over the world also. Again, this ultra pragmatism and whatever you feel attracted to, whether it's from, you know, from Thailand or Africa or the Golden Dawn, you just pick and pick and pick. And then make your own little stew out of that. And it's that affected me deeply also. And I hope that I still carry on in that kind of open-minded, eclectic attitude. I would say that the journal that you mentioned, the Fenris Wolf, is an example of that kind of eclectic approach, where I invite people from many different, you know, walks of occult life to write about historical stuff, about contemporary stuff, and just it's important to be open-minded, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And you were able to learn so much, and it did have a very open-minded nature. But as you stated earlier, and just in general, a lot of these authors, a lot of those modalities are considered dark or the dark side. You were attracted to those things, but reading your book, it never felt like you thought of them as, let's say, evil or dark. You just saw them as what they were. Was there ever a point where you felt like there was something strange about being attracted to these dark things, or did you just acknowledge and align with what you were attracted to without judgment?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Knowledge of and alignment with, that's the key thing, where you have what I call intuitive direction, right? You're not making your headway or creating your path based on, you know, a trajectory that someone else built for you. It's not built on like career strategies. It's not built on rational things. To a certain extent, possibly, yeah. I mean, today I live off of writing about magic, so it did become eventually a kind of a career thing. But I think that the main thing is that, of course, trust yourself, trust your intuition, and as they say, trust the river. You know, you don't know where you're going to end up. You don't know what's around the next corner. But I learned this. I'm so glad about that. And grateful that I learned about that so early on. You know, when I was around 22, I've always had some kind of printed matter going on, a fanzine, writing about comics, writing about trash movies, rock and roll, always. But then it's sort of, I felt that I drifted out of that a little bit, but yet I had been so formatted with always having some kind of periodical, some kind of fanzine, some kind of writing project. And so that's how the Fenris Wolf popped up in 1989 was the first issue, which was basically like an occultural fanzine writing about this intersection between occultism, weird art, weird popular culture, and everything that I loved so much. And I think that's my psychic structure. Like, I am very hungry. I take in a lot of information, and in my enthusiasm, I want to share or reformulate in a way, repackage so that other people can enjoy it too, so that's, I think, is the deal with all of my publishing ventures. And through the Fenris Wolf, it was kind of a door opener in a way, because at that time there was no internet.
Right.
About 1988, 1989. So everything was done in the mail, with books, magazines, fanzines, newsletters, letter writing. It's wonderful. And for some reason, it created kind of a buzz even in my work with the first issue, because I got permission from Anton LaVey to reprint some pieces that he had written, and also from William Burroughs. I got a letter. I have it here on my wall, sort of granting me permission to reprint one of his essays about psychedelics. And it was just like it was kind of a mind blower to get that kind of response. I didn't really suspect it. And a similar thing that was even more of a mind blower was that when you're young and you like music, you want to play music, you want to try your hand at it. And of course I did that too. So I had a band called White Stains, and we made a record called Sweet Jane, which was basically an ode or a homage to Jane Mansfield, but also specifically to her involvement or love affair with Anton LaVey of the Church of Satan. So it's all about, too many words, the guitars were out of tune, whatever. It turned into something quite beautiful and heartfelt. And my friend Genesis then, who we were working together in Temple Psychic Youth, he loved that record, and he said that you should send this to LaVey. I met him in California just recently, and I have his address. So I thought, literally, what the hell? I have nothing to lose. So I did that. And then I got this incredible letter back, which was endearing and appreciative of the initiative. And also he made me a member then of the Church of Satan. And I just couldn't believe it, because here was my magical fundament. You create the kind of culture that you want to take part of and be a part of. That's the magic, that, you use your own creativity to manifest something that you want to be in, basically. Right. And that worked so early on for me. And on that same trip to California in 1989, I met LaVey, I met Kenneth Anger for the first time, and many, many other cool people. Fakir Musafar. It was just like a complete, like, boink, hit me over the head so heavily and broke my head open at the same time. So I was a very different person when I came home from that trip. And from then, I think I decided then that, there's no turning back, if this is possible, that means that life is potentially incredibly wonderful and magical, with a little bit of magic, which was for me then, experimental, pragmatic, eclectic, but also absolutely always weaving in the cultural expressions. And at this time, Genesis coined this term, occulture, which I think is brilliant.
Yes.
And we worked with it already then, like strategically, like, okay, so let's make this music and have those messages inside and try to affect change in the outer. So it was already a kind of a concept back then in the, I would say late 1980s. And then after that, I was just, got initiated into the OTO. I worked a little bit with an American Golden Dawn group, and of course, Temple of Psychic Youth, and LaVey had made me a member of the Church of Satan. So I was just like, completely swimming in this beautiful stew of colorful impressions and expressions. It was very trippy, and from then on, I think I just grew up in it. Of course, I had other jobs from sustenance and stuff, but the real work was always about, having a publishing company or having a publishing operation or making new music, going on tours with music. And it was always about magic. I never wrote a lyric or a poem for music that didn't have this kind of in between the lines programming for the unit. In a way, there was nothing was just a pure creative expression. It was all things needed to be magical. Today, I'm a little bit more relaxed, but on the other hand, I feel that the magic is even stronger now.
Oh, absolutely. You were fully immersed in it then. I just want to ask you about that time. So what I'm getting from you is that you're around these figures like Anton LaVey, the Church of Satan. Like some people, especially religious people, if you're a Christian or Jew, they have a lot of strong feelings of negativity towards that. But it seems like from your perspective, you just saw everything as magical and neutral and reserved judgment until you experienced it yourself.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind also that I was never raised in any religion. Sweden is an incredibly secular country, and my parents were like, it was zero. It's like zero religion, and I'm very grateful for that, of course, because it's the same thing with growing up in general. You have to distance yourself from it, and then eventually you return to it. Like you become a little rebel, and then you come back to the fold. But now, if anything, I will say that I have not returned to secularity, if that's even a word. I believe in what I have called, source magic, is that we have ingrained, actually programmed in our genes, in our survival instinct, this connection with the shamanic mind frame, or a kind of a holistic view of the world. Most people have very many layers or superstructures pressing that down, but it's so strongly ingrained in us, and that's the reason why we have the need for transcendental experiences, for instance, why people like to get high, and where it's culturally usually uncondoned, not in Portland or Oregon, but that's the reason why people get drunk, which is such a boring thing to do. But people have this inherent need of transcendental experiences, and that comes from that was how we used to get our real important information, through those epiphanic experiences, and the shamanic ones. So I think that today I would say that I'm very much in favor of a kind of a holistic magic, and it has all the shades, all the colors, all the nuances. There's nothing moral or moralistic about any of them. To me, it's basically all the same. And I think the reason why I was attracted to, for instance, Crowley, Kenneth Anger's work with Crowley's system, expressing that in his films, and the LaVeyan, concretely the Satan thing, and other things. It was just a personal preference. Again, my true, honest, and genuine resonance with that kind of culture. Like, why did I, as a teenager, love old monster movies? Why did I love film noir? Why did I love, these hard-boiled crime stories? It was always because this is the same kind of thing. There was an anti-hero who had a good heart, but he was maybe a criminal on the surface. So there's this kind of dichotomy between who's really good and who's really bad. Whereas the do-gooders, or the moralists of the normal narrative, might actually, in fact, have been more criminal than this sort of loner, this lone wolf in the night.
Isn't that funny? I just want to add, though, that though you didn't have the religious upbringing, you did have the open-mindedness that was provided by being exposed to things like science fiction novels, comic books, all of these really enlightened kind of fiction gave you a framework to explore. Like, it gave you an option that something else could be there.
Yeah, totally. And then again, what happened with many of my friends from school, some of them were good friends, but that just happens, you're good friends, then you sort of drift out, and life happens, you get families and stuff like that. But what I could notice also was that many people from the formative times when you're out watching bands and listening to music, and it's really good, usually, hopefully radical stuff, and then you're so immersed in it. And then when I meet these people, like, a couple of years later, they're completely corporate. And I just wonder what the hell happened. You had such good taste in music and culture, but then it was some kind of weird invisible rubber band that brought you back to the fold. And today you're corporate. And I'm no moralist, to each his own. But it was so remarkable to see, again, that need for a strong transcendental time, at least, before you went into the back to the fold.
And also shows
I never came back.
Well, it also shows the power of paradigms. When people get programmed with these ideas that they have to be a certain thing by a certain age, they have to take that corporate job. They may have magical explorations, but paradigms are so powerful and they're embedded in the subconscious that they just pull that magical person back into the matrix.
Yeah, no, totally. That's a great way of describing that. And I think if there's anything that has validated my experience, because of course, like everyone has moments of doubt or periods of doubt and depression, and what am I doing? Am I wasting? Because so many from the kind of background that I came from, many people, it was like they're super wealthy or whatever, uber wealthy, but that was never my thing to pursue any of that stuff. I just wanted to be, and then along the line, I might have thought that, whoa, did I waste my life? But now specifically, I have absolutely not wasted my life. No. And I think the funny thing, as you know, I write in the introduction there also that the working title of the book was 2 times Saturn, right? It was to mark my second Saturn return. I am now 58 going into my, I will soon be 59. So I'm on my way out of the second Saturn return. And I thought it would be a great idea to sort of sum up all the things that I have experienced, specifically focusing on the magical or occult or occultural, because of course in a lifetime I have done so many things specifically with culture that it doesn't really fit in under this magical umbrella, just stuff that I've created or whatever. But this 2 times Saturn book was a chance for me to not casually reminisce. It was a thorough going through what I had experienced to evaluate. And I'm happy to say that the evaluation turned out positive, meaning I have not wasted my life. On the contrary, I have taken in so much stuff from amazing people, some like these celebrity magicians. There are also those who are completely unknown and shall remain unknown. That's their will. But I have had such a, well, let's call it infusion then, great infusions of energies, stuff, wisdom. That is my absolute duty to keep it going, to keep that spirit going. And in a way, like I've always done, reformulate it, repackage it for a new generation or simply for a new network or audience. And that's basically my job. That's what I do. And that's I couldn't think of anything more meaningful than that.
So essentially holding that frequency, bringing it through time, interfacing with all of this archaic knowledge, and then holding that. And then, like you said, updating it, giving it different language so it can be processed by the humans of the now. And do you think that some of your motivation could have been a past life experience? Perhaps in a past life, you were a powerful magician in an older time. Have you ever postulated on that?
Yeah, I have, but as postulations only, not allowing it to go too deeply or take too much time. But I consider myself a very open-minded person. But I usually try to stick with the life I have, and if I have experiences, whether in dreams or in other kinds of experiences where there are notions or resonances going back to certain people or whatever, I take them absolutely seriously. I don't tend to go beyond this life forwards, because we can never know. So that's for me is kind of redundant speculation, whether it's just lights out or whether I'm just like a colorful mind that moves on in space and time. We'll see. There's no point in spending time. However, the backwards journey is more interesting because you could, of course, argue, which I usually do nowadays, that it's all in the mind, it's all in our inner sphere. For instance, about influx coming from the past. Why shouldn't it? I mean, genetically, we are like tape recorders, right? Until the point where we literally disseminate our seed and make new babies. That's when, a new chapter starts. But all of my ancestors' experiences are in my DNA, just as my experiences are also accumulated. So in that sense, from a biological point of view, we are the sum of all those we have been before. But I think your question is more about the mind thing and the soul possibly, and coming, where do souls migrate from and to? That's a different story. So when you ask me if I have been like, a great magician, I would probably say that would probably be more on a soul level, where you find a new body. But it is the reason why I believe more in that kind of stuff is basically because our bodies already speak that language. We are containers of everything that we have experienced before. Right. So why the hell not, And then how the soul is attached to the body, we don't really know. That's another speculation. However, it's interesting also when you look back in history. I have the good fortune of my father was a historian. And on my mother's side, she was kind of a mix of a couple of noble families, and they were so vain that they were very thorough, and have always been thorough about genealogy, keeping track of where they come from. It's kind of like a hard currency. And I can find my way back to, many Swedish and Danish, kings and Vikings, and even back to Charlemagne. It's so many generations away, but it's still undeniable. So in that sense, I can backtrack and look at who am I related to? And then if I find a resonance, because some of them are historical people, so you have both biology and possible other kinds of resonance too. Wow. On the other hand, I think that life today is just so incredibly fascinating. So I'm not prone to while away the hours in that kind of romantic yearning, not forwards or backwards in a way. But if I find a cultural resonance, I might check out, when did this person actually die? To see if there's some kind of match between their death and my birth. I think that's just vanity in a way, like, cosmic vanity. Who knows?
It's very egocentric, but you're so right about reincarnation. I've never really thought of it that way, but the genetic memory, the ancestral memory is in the cells, it's in the DNA. I mean, that's science for people that use science as a religion. It's all there. And perhaps some of those leaked in memories through dreams or other situations are the memories of your ancestors versus your ego or your soul's past life iteration.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And also, you have to think that we don't only leave like biological seed or create new human life. We also create change in a lot of people's minds, whether it's only our own families or through major culture, simply through culture. Like, culture can also be a conversation at a dinner table where someone goes away having learned something they didn't know before. That's also culture. And in that sense, I think that that was something that all of these main mentors, let's call them that, Genesis, P-Orridge, Anton LaVey, Kenneth Anger, and then a few others, were all the same in the sense that culture was their, let's call it, alchemical solvent. It was the thing that they moved on and worked through. You could argue that Genesis was like a no-brainer. He worked with music, he worked with poetry, he worked with performance art, all these things that are under the art umbrella. So there it's, very clear. Kenneth Anger, ditto. He was a filmmaker who made films of, with, and about magic. And then LaVey was, you think of him as this infamous Satanist, which of course he was, and the Church of Satan, and media savvy shenanigans, and then the later isolation. But what he actually was, and his main magical thing was his music. He was such an exceptionally brilliant musician, and to be there in his kitchen where he kept all his synthesizers and see and hear him play and perform like a kind of a diabolical Chico Marx in a way. He was such a great showman performing. But that was also magical programming. He made his medleys based on stuff that he wanted to change in the outer world. It could be an old forgotten song title that then became relevant through, the butterfly effect or whatever you want to call it. He was very aware of those things. So for him also, culture, and specifically music, was very important. And he taught me in between the lines about culture, magic, through watching movies together. It was like, it was not, oh, so now you take the wand and you do this ritual, la da da. It was more like hanging out and watching movies and seeing what kind of subtexts there are in those movies. It's kind of invaluable. And that's why I called the book that came out slightly before Meetings with the Remarkable Magicians was another anthology of essays called In Between the Lines, because I think it's a good book title, but it's also, for me, very relevant in the sense that that's how I've been taught for the most part. It has not been distinct instruction by rote. It's been through innuendos. It's been in between the lines. It's been through intuition passed on in a way. And for me, it's been very, very powerful and useful.
Yes, because honestly, I think people that study magic know this. The information that's required for that type of spiritual development does not necessarily exist in the linear dimension, because when you are able to crack the linear perspective, you can then expand yourself, and there's information there to meet you, and you grow as a person. So that's really what it's about. And I think it's very interesting that you pointed out in your book that a big component to the magical lifestyle is developing yourself, personal development, spiritual, mental, physical even.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I have grown to be more and more, I'd say, of a Jungian. I respect Carl Jung a lot. Yes. I respect Freud also. I'm very interested in psychology. But the Jungian concept of individuation has become probably the most important one there is when I talk to other people. Because when you're young, you're looking for structure, and specifically a structure that you can go like all in and learn all the stuff and climb the stairs and, be part of the pyramid. But even pyramids can become inert if the teaching doesn't really convey that sense or spark that ignites the individuation process. And I that was one of the reasons why I was attracted to Crowley and the Thelema philosophy, and why I got engaged in the OTO, which is one of his magical groups, was this my absolute respect for and the importance of developing as a human being to find your, what he called the true will, and then make life decisions based on that, not the other way around. But I think that even that can become inert when these, just psychodramatic efforts or posing, whereas a real deeply, anchored individuation process always is in flux. We are never, we don't stop developing. It's always something happening. And that's the kind of flow, the proverbial flow that you have to go with, even if it sort of contradicts what you've been before. Or maybe the danger of growing up is also to find these sort of comfort zones. Comfort zones are very dangerous because they are like the first steps of calcification and potential inertia. When you feel that, oh, I have such a great life, but what's actually going on? Are you still developing? Right. Are you still maturing? Are you still learning? And for me, those are sacrosanct. They're holy concepts, and that's why I've broken with certain occult environments, not in animosity, but simply because I don't feel that kind of spirit or culture is honored enough. It's more about the structure and the degrees and, getting your diplomas, whatever, and a funny hat. That accounts for nothing if it doesn't reflect in the real world, so to speak. You have to, there should be no difference between your inner life and your outer life, I think. It should be a merger.
Yes, essentially, once you have the knowledge, you gain the knowledge through these experiences, then you're supposed to utilize that applied magic. You go into service mode, and service shows up differently for different people. It's usually based around their talents and what some people would call their magic. But if you're not conducting some form of service as a magical human, then you're stagnant. You're energetically stagnant. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think that there's, although I don't agree with, the Japanese wonderful lady, Marie Kondo, the one who strips the apartments and throws things away.
Oh, the Feng Shui lady.
Yeah. I love her in a way, but I'm not like that. I'm more like a chaos hoarder. But anyway, there's something to be said about her key concept is that how do you define whether you get rid of something or keep it? Well, her definition is if it brings you joy, you keep it, right? And I think that's the main thing, how you can check yourself whether you're on the right path. Are you feeling joy? Are you feeling harmony and joy and happiness? Are you laughing rather than crying? And it sounds so banal, but it's actually true for most people that they never ask themselves those questions on a daily basis. And I try to, tell my wife, often that, I've never been as happy as I am now. Wow. Everything is in place, but that doesn't make me inert or want to stop here. I just want to, keep going. But it's a wonderful thing to admit to yourself in honesty that I am really happy. And I hope that other people do that too. I suspect they don't, because it's not part of this kind of imprint or programming we talked about. It's rather about keeping people very dissatisfied, very depressed, so that they can medicate or self-medicate or consume or basically do everything but individuate,
and look within for that healing. They want to externalize everything and look for something to bring them some sort of joy, but really all it is just that biochemical reaction. When they make a purchase, the reward center flashes, some chemicals are released, and they don't even think about it on that level. And those things that cause us joy amplify our life, which then amplify the love that we put out in the universe. Those things that aren't bringing us joy, even if they're material little things, they suck away our life force, which then impedes our manifestation ability. It impedes our ability to move forward in a functional way.
Here, absolutely. And I think that also is, you just can't compromise about these things. And you could say that, individuation, like many Jungian terms, it's very kind of worn out. It's become pop psychology in a way. What does it really mean? But for me, it's very, very simple, actually. And it requires no technology. It requires no real financial investment. It's about making choices every day and also having an internal dialogue. And I think that's the greatest, detrimental programming that we have in our Western culture specifically, is that we are taught not to value what we experience on the inside, whether it's a mental or mind thing, or whether it's physical stuff. But everything comes from the inside. It's like an epistemological pipeline from ourselves. We have all the answers already. We just need to trust that the stuff that comes out is real. But of course it's real. And I have this pet thing when the religion of scientism that we experience today a lot. And those people are, they worship the empirical lifestyle or whatever we want to call it. But I just wrote something, and I know that it pissed some people off, that bases the foundation of empiricism. And I mean that absolutely seriously. The foundation of empiricism, which, by the way, is not something in itself, it's a method, is wild speculation. And they freaked out when they heard that, because where do ideas come from? It's not by cogitation. You can't cogitate an idea. You can process an idea mentally and analyze it, but where do ideas come from? Well, it usually comes from inside, or in conversation with someone else, where we have this concept of the third mind appearing when two people are in dialogue, like you and me, and you push crazy ideas back and forth. And I mean, many scientific discoveries have come through dream states or other kinds of epiphanies. And, so many scientists have been killed because they presented something that was not in line with the dogma of the time. It's insane.
It's insane.
And I think that, yeah, but basically it all comes from somewhere. And usually every scientific discovery, idea, something comes from the creative mind of human beings in wild speculation. It's not even a theory. That's just the way it is. And what I find is so interesting, again, to return it to culture and occulture, is that now, of course, so much is about being so technologically advanced that we can really, fly out into space and also return. We can go to other planets and also return, and solar power and all these things that were basically science fiction only 50 years ago or 60 years ago. But of course, the people who worked with it and developed it, they weren't force-fed with heavy science. They read the comic books. They listened to the radio shows of weird science fiction, pulp magazines. That was their impetus to create what we now have in terms of space travel. So it kind of works blatantly obvious that the imprints we get as kids that spark an enthusiasm and, again, a joy, that's what most people actually do want to work with in life, whether or not it goes against what your parents want. There's that kind of joy of indulgence early on should be made sacred. Parents should keep an eye, monitor their kids. What makes my kid happy? And then they should really only hone or develop that. Because again, it might change later on down the line. But if kids are taught that what they like is wrong for some reason, then they will be very neurotic people.
Absolutely. I was just going to add, the pursuit of those things that you love, it's natural. That means your subconscious is telling you have the ability to do these things. So you have the desire to go find those things. And then we're suppressed by, again, the paradigms of society, whether they're parental paradigms saying, no, you shouldn't do that, study to get a decent job. But really, that's why we're here. That's part of our soul's purpose, I believe, is to pursue those things that we are attracted to and in love with and seem to have a natural talent for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think also, again, to return to Jung, which I seem to do, another pop concept he had was, of course, the thing with the collective unconscious, right? That we are all connected, and it's not really that far-fetched. We're the same species. We're the races aren't that different, and also we're all over the world. There's like complete migration and communication, and we're genetically the same and stuff like that. So that means that back then, when we were a lot fewer, we shared similar experiences. And those experiences and their interpretations were genetically stored. And I think that, so it's not really a far off concept or a far out concept. We are connected. And anyone who has had a decent psychedelic illumination knows that we're all connected to everything, not only everyone, but also to everything in a kind of a cosmic holism or a holistic cosmic approach. And I think that the reason why there is so much magic and occulture and similar things in the air, in the zeitgeist, is simply because our collective unconscious is telling us that we have to wake up to the dire straits we're in and change it by integrating a more holistic approach and a more magical approach to how life should be lived. Because the causal materialism and rapacious attitudes is basically going to kill off not the planet. The planet will be fine, but it will kill off our habitat specifically, which is a shame because personally, I love life. I think it's great.
I do too.
And I think that it would be a shame, and it is already a shame considering how many species we have killed off and how much has been destroyed. So I think that, if there's a reason why wow, why is this being studied now at universities within academia? The study of Western esotericism or religious studies about, magical topics, and also in pop culture, also in my kind of in-betweenness of occulture, which is basically like a kind of a pop anthropological approach to looking at culture and why it's inherently magical, what's the reason for that, etc., etc. So I think all of these things, whether highbrow or lowbrow, are little nodes that relay signals back and forth in the hope that some of it will stick in people's minds so that they can open up their minds and realize, whoa, this is really, really not good. We need to do something about it. Then, of course, thankfully, we have at least a lot of documentation about how life has been lived before, and there are some very few indigenous tribes still living who have a complete healthier lifestyle and healthier approach to living within nature and with nature. So I think the battle isn't completely lost, but it seems to be like a very, very strong uphill or hurdle that needs to be worked with. And I find it fascinating because there wasn't this much magic around 50 years ago.
Right.
But now there is.
And especially the openness to it without judgment.
Yeah.
So does that then lend itself to the idea that there is a forward progression of development, which will then lead to something really positive? Now, there are different cultures that talk about how we're moving into a golden age in their own way, and different spiritual philosophies. But ultimately, these nodes, like you're talking about, of people waking up and disseminating information and then that accelerating, seems to indicate that we're moving towards a new Earth, maybe not the new Aeon as Crowley talked about, but just a new Earth where magic as a science and all of these other higher concepts are integrated, and we're living in a truly more love-based society. Does that, do you feel that? Do you sense that progression towards something?
Yeah, I do. It's kind of undeniable. And then whether it's for good or bad, we probably won't see that, but hopefully someone will see it. And I think that one of the problems is basically when the magical experience, which should be individual, or the shamanic experience, the problem was, and still is in a way, when it became a proxy thing, when there was a priest or a structure or a religion that took over the responsibility to give this to people, in kind of symbolic form instead of real. And that's very tied in with this thing that you don't trust the stuff that you feel inside, or the information that comes from inside. You have to trust what the priest says or what the politician says. There's always someone outside, like a proxy, carrying the truth. But as we know, it's very malleable and it's very corruptible, and we're sitting in that kind of mess today. So I think that my hopes for the future will be that kind of spiritual culture will be honored, center stage, not only in living together, in nature, with nature, but also trusting your inner information more. And then, of course, that could be how a tribe pops up or develops, by sharing stories that are resonant with the other stories shared. And those who are not resonant, they can go to another tribe and see what's going on there. And then, unfortunately, I think that humans are such aggressive creatures that there will still be, of course, tribal warfare and aggression. It's just, we are but animals. However, we can also and it's happening already, and has been for a long time in so many places on this planet, where you have magical societies, with nature religions, and you have the peaceful Eastern religions of Buddhism and Taoism. They don't feel a need to, slaughter their neighbors or, steal stuff. They are so busy with cultivating their minds. Isn't that a good lesson? And there, that leads to the example, of course, of the Tibetan diaspora after the horrible Chinese invasion and with their materialist culture destroying and taking over. But that actually led to the Tibetan diaspora that has led to probably a survival of the Vajrayana Buddhism in a much, actually paradoxically, more preserved sense than if it had stayed in Tibet and been crushed by the Chinese.
Interesting. But then doesn't that then show us that there's some other story that's unfolding for the human race? We can try to get an idea of it by studying history, studying these people, studying magic, but then ultimately there's this other narrative that perhaps our subconscious has access to, but not our conscious mind or even the collective conscious mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that again, like I told you before about this speculation in terms of time forwards and backwards, it is very interesting, and it definitely, learning from history is invaluable. We have to do that. But I think we are in such a predicament today because even though we have all the history or a lot of history to be studied, we still don't learn from it. Again, it's the rote thing. That doesn't mean that you understand what's being written. And that's, again, why I feel that you have to read a lot, but read between the lines, be critical about the dissemination and what it's for. And I think that in terms of the future, again, that's speculation. However, whatever we do, like you and I are doing in this very moment, it's a building block for the future.
Absolutely.
Because we don't know how it will affect your listeners. Maybe some people will be, whoa, this is amazing. I think I'll, start in a yoga class or meditation. I was so inspired by this conversation. And I think then, we've done our job. Then we've done our duty. And I think also how it can change things is maybe, since we're such a, consumerist culture, there was a lot of criticism that came in. I remember that when yoga started appearing, what's called housewife yoga, when you have bright, colorful yoga suits and stuff like that. And it's kind of a commodified activity, but it's as beneficial as it is if you go to an ashram in India and pay a lot of money for that. The main thing is that you have to do it. You have to do the yoga. You have to do the meditation. It's so important. And I find, having been through so many things, many technologies in a way under this hocus pocus umbrella, I think yoga and meditation are the two cornerstones, the fundamentals that can never be avoided or should never be avoided. It's much more important than, knowing the Hebrew alphabet or understanding the, corpus hermeticum and all its symbolism. That's great and could be great mind openers in a way. But all you really need to find out about yourself and how you're connected to everything else is just to sit down in peace and quiet and think about it until there's no thinking anymore. Then you'll really get to know yourself. And that's like the core, the spine of the individuation process. It's not necessarily about doing, answering your questions with a yes or a no. Do I like this? Do I don't like this? It's not necessarily a process of cogitation and intellectual stuff. It's more about allowing yourself to be in yourself.
Right, because there's a direct connection to something higher there. Even in the Christian religion, Jesus himself said that the temple of God's within. I mean, he's saying it. And also that connection, the subconscious mind, is our conduit to the infinite, whether it's the Akashic records, as some people describe it, or just literally the all. That's the interface point. So if we can hone and develop a relationship with our subconscious mind through things like yoga and meditation, that's how we expand ourselves spiritually. Like you said, it's cool to know all of this deep knowledge, and it can advance you in a way, but there's nothing more advancing. There's nothing more intimate than that direct experience.
Yeah. And I think I have a concept within my, it's not a system, but this kind of general philosophy of what I call magic-anthropology. And it's a term called sympathesis. Most people know the term as an adjective, like sympathetic magic means that you use symbols, like you affect the great by the small. If you have like a little talisman or something that you work with in the hope that it will reflect in the greater real world in a way. But sympathesis, the noun, is basically about how the human mind inherently, and that this is also a heritage from that source magic awareness, from the shamanic awareness. The sympathesis means that the human mind, can also be human culture, creates the kind of magical or religious system that it needs to transcend. I don't know if that's inherently something has to do with human ingenuity, the need for work, to work with the body and all modalities and all aspects of being human. But if there's one thing that humans do, we build stuff. We build not only things, tools, we also build structures. And sometimes these structures become so cumbersome and so eventually inert that they will be transcended. But on a personal level, for instance, if I'm attracted to like I was, you call it the darker side. Well, let's stick with that. I was attracted to that for various reasons that I don't even know about, or we can only sort of vaguely analyze. But I constructed my own system of that. I had my own sympathesis going up till the point when I felt completely saturated. And I think that for me happened during the early, what do you call it? From 2000 to 2010, not the teens, but the zeros.
They say the aughts are just the 2000s.
The 2000s, exactly. And I think that that was kind of a, I don't know, not a depressed, but a little confused phase in my mind, basically saying, with all of this stuff that I have, now what do I do with it? That's like an existential crisis in a way. But I just realized after the fact that I had just come to the point of sympathesis. I had built my structure until I could build no more. So I just needed to transcend it. And after that, I felt fine, just being fine with what I have. I don't need to have a structure. I don't need to work in a structure with other people. I rid myself, if you can say that, of that structural mind. I do like to work with other people, but I've learned the hard way by being so involved in so many groups or orders that human dynamics, social dynamics, group dynamics can be a pain in the ass. You know, it always goes sour and it's very complicated to resolve, pinpoint. And it's also, it goes against the goal, right? The goal is to define, refine yourself, cultivate yourself, not be involved in a lot of bickering with, other vain occultists. It completely, goes against the object of the goal of it. So I think that, sympathesis on whether on an individual level or on a cultural level, it's inevitable. And maybe that's what we're seeing in our approaching, hopefully not an extinction, but in a kind of a cosmic crisis, human cosmic crisis, where we have to transcend all these horrible structures that we have built in and become inert in.
Wow, that's so huge, because that's really what's happening, because humans themselves, we are an evolving species. Like, there has to be some point where we integrate more of that spiritual information, because we've hit the limits of the material aspect. Like, we're inert in our material expression. We've cracked everything. We've figured everything out, down to splitting an atom. I mean, there's probably technologies, material technologies that we don't even know about yet. So now it's time for that next phase. Now, do you feel like it's related to things like the age of Aquarius, or is it just the natural progression of a species that happens to correspond with the now?
I think the latter. I think every sort of aeonic, progression, procession, astrological interpretations, it's beautiful, but it's basically, those are basically human constructs.
Right. Exactly.
Even the regularities of, watching the cosmos and the planetary movements and stuff, what the hell do the planets care about that? Whether we will ant people understand them or not, they are too big. They couldn't care less. But it's good, empowering for us. Again, that's exactly a sympathesis. We for thousands of years we watch the stars and watch the planets, and then we can come up with something that is an astrological system that eventually becomes an astronomical system that eventually goes into keeping time by going into the quartz atom. It's really trippy and stuff, but what the hell does it really mean?
Right.
What's really the point of it? And I think that I'm not in any way anti-scientific. I think it's all good. Something good comes out of it. But I think a great turning point was when humans started using tools for outrospection and introspection, meaning basically the telescope and the microscope, where we could see more than our senses, that we could feel more than our sensual impressions. And I think that's when people became kind of hubristic, right? Because it was a feat in itself to create that technology, and it was, and it still is. But it took us away from our, quotes here, natural way of looking at things. And you can go, you can stroll in the forest and experience a lot of things. If you bend down and look at the earth, you will see a lot of critters and ants and stuff, and you can smell stuff and you can feel it, and you can really be in tune. And my experience is that the more technology you bring in that experience, the less you will be in tune. It almost, for me, presupposes or requires a real physical proximity with the senses, with the outside. Then you can understand the outside. You can't understand it by cogitation again, to technological analysis. It really means nothing. Those uses that technology brings is usually for commodifying culture or analyzing a causal experience, which can be brilliant in medicine, in forensic work with solving crimes, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to this primordial human empowerment with greater nature, it's almost best to be, perhaps even literally naked, like to swim naked in the sea, to walk naked in the forest, like witches do, and magicians. And I think that's for a reason. It's not to be, to have an orgy, although that I'm sure can happen too, but it's to be exposed to the powers of imminent greater nature, and then also to radiate forth in absolute, as strong a signal as we can from ourselves to greater nature.
And yes,
feedback.
And also connect with that true reality, because I believe as humans, we often forget that we created this human created world and put it on top of a world that was already there, that had existed for millions, hundreds of millions of years, and completely forgot, you could say collectively, not people like us and my listeners, but the human race kind of forgot that we did that. And then we only value the human world that we created, and we see that other world as either inanimate or a resource.
Absolutely. And I think, it's sad. And I think, unfortunately, it has to do with, again, inertia, systems that become too big, too unwieldy, too cumbersome, too rigid, too dogmatic. People forget what it was that was said in the beginning that made them tick, what was good, what was joyous, what was bringing love or bringing good things. And then it becomes something else, Unfortunately, again, it's group dynamics. People want power, so they take power. But then again, things do change. That's maybe a blessing. Whether a thing is inert or not, something or someone will eventually change it, because that's just the nature of how we work. But I think that maybe if we talk about eons, and maybe touching about Crowley's Aeon of Horus, he of course was influenced by Egyptian mythology, and Horus is like the child, after, Osiris, Isis, the father and the mother, and then Horus. And okay, so that seems like a natural progression, right? It's time for the kid to take over. And if we translate it to other, maybe the Abrahamic or monotheistic religions, it's like maybe, or hopefully, the time of the angry sky daddy is over. It should be over, because it's only brought havoc when it's been too systematized and allowed to become inert. So there's only anger, there's only authoritarianism, there's only, solving things by violence, and people living in fear. Well, what kind of life is that? It's horrible.
It's no life at all. And in fact, the effects, you're saying that's the cause, and the effect will be the movement forward, perhaps.
Hopefully. I really hope so. And, again, let's not speculate too much, but maybe there is something to that old speculation or saying that, things need to get worse before they get better. To me, that sounds a little bit like a,
sadomasochistic, maybe?
Yeah. But I think that maybe it's also true in the sense that people are very slow, on an individual level, on the cultural level. So maybe we need to be in shock. Unfortunately, there is this thing also during warfare, people become more loving, and they become more supportive of people they don't even know in times of crises, natural disasters, really just crises. People are there for each other, even though they don't know each other. And that, I think, is fundamentally human also, because we are connected and we are the same, more or less. And I think that if there's a tsunami or a crash or a bomb hits or whatever, people will help each other. It's inherently human. And that gives me a little bit hope, because even though in warfare there are people actually shooting at each other, there's an underground spirit of the people who are not soldiers, the people who are only suffering in a way, and they will be, prone to take care at least of their own. And that could be, a beautiful thing in itself in those calamity situations. I think looking at magic in general, I think it will become more of an integrated part. And what I mean by that is simply that we will become at some point fed up with all the unnecessary violence, unnecessary destruction, unnecessary disrespect for nature. And I don't know whether it will be some kind of, collective awakening, or whether it's just gradually people, waking up to a world of magic. I have no idea, but I do believe that will be the saving grace. And it's non-denominational. It's not non-religious. It's non-sectarian. It's just waking up to what needs to be done, and, and work with everyone who feels the same way. And I think that, historically, on a micro level, it has happened in communes. People have a vision, they want to do something different. But then again, you need to be very careful, because human dynamics, group dynamics, will enter even the most ideal of the idealistic groups. And there will be corruption, and there will be petty power fighting over, oh, you slept with my girlfriend, or you borrowed $10 from me. It's always those petty things that grow and turn into disasters, basically.
Yes, they tend to erode the original fabric. But like you were saying earlier, I mean, when people come together in crisis, it shows us that there is an underlying pulse of love. Everything's made out of love. All of these different spiritual teachings just talk about how if you pull things back, pre-matter, pre-energy, there's just this force of love that shows up in a lot of different ways for different cultures around the world. So that love, that pulse of love, the fact that it's all made out of love, gives me that same hope that you're talking about, that we will integrate these things. And I see people integrating magical techniques, albeit it's very elementary, but they're starting to with things like visualization, bringing will to form. If that's just the beginning. If people can grasp just even the fact that they can visualize bringing something into their consciousness and then bringing it into the third dimension, that's a start. It's like, hey, look, you just did something. That's magic. By the way, there's these other things as well.
No, exactly. And I think that we talked about, housewife yoga and this commodification of essentially very powerful teachings. And I think that's great. And I'm all for commodification if it leads people who would otherwise not come into that environment. Another concept, mindfulness. That was something that initially was looked down upon in the sort of esoteric communities. It's just like, oh, it's just pop. But who gives a shit? If it affects people in a good way, they go on a weekend course of mindfulness and it helps them be more focused or more relaxed or more in tune with themselves. I think that's a great thing. It doesn't need to be called some Indian name and have a guru or be esoteric in order to be powerful. That's the lesson. It can be disseminated in a pop way. And I think in a way, that's also what Leary did, for good or bad. His dissemination of acid led to, crazy times and a lot of, cultural epiphanies and good times. But it also became like the foundation of real movements, whether in civil rights or women's lib or just, in general, a more altruistic approach in a way, because of this decision to chaotically distribute something that at the time was actually legal and then became illicit after it became too crazy. And I think that those things, talk about, the summer of love, and again, this sort of peak psychedelic environments, that was also part of, a thing of the age of Aquarius, was clothed in this astrological, mythological thing. And that's also beautiful to connect it like that, because maybe that was the thing that brought that to Leary's mind and the collective unconscious of these early psychedelicists. Maybe it was not their intellectual decision where they have a meeting, drinking coffee, saying, yes, let's disseminate this thing, and let's create chaos. Maybe they were as affected by, maybe not cosmic, but the necessity of bringing a new thing to the table that they had experienced, and that was very, very positive for them in their individuation processes. And it certainly shaped culture.
Oh, it changed the world. It absolutely changed the world. And some Buddhists have even said that LSD and Timothy Leary in that era was like the nuclear bomb of consciousness, meaning we had developed this material nuclear bomb which could destroy essentially the earth, but vast swaths of civilizations. Now, because of that, we needed to balance that out with the nuclear bomb of consciousness, which is what would happen if you would take a strong dose of LSD. You would have a deep samadhi experience. You go to the deepest points of meditation instantly almost. No, absolutely. I totally buy that. And I've used that analogy myself also. That it's a counterpoint, because Hoffman sort of discovered it in 1938, and then he took his accidental dose later on in 43, and then it was like, the doors of perception were flung open in a way and changed culture forever, and it's never going to go away. And I think, again, that's a good example of what I call occulturation, when something goes from the occult or the unknown into the mainstream, and maybe Leary's guerrilla attitude wasn't the best or the most, morally correct, but still he did it and they did it, and the merry pranksters, and that was part of that culture at the time, fueled by LSD. But it brought in a very radical change in mind frame very quickly, and that's something I think I hope for. Not necessarily through psychedelics, although I suspect it will be always part of this counter movement. But something similar that becomes undeniable, unstoppable, that will not allow people to have a cool trip on a Saturday and then go back to work on the Monday.
but just it would be so deeply affecting together with other people. Maybe some kind of culture or new kind of music experienced live could be that kind of change, for instance, or art in general.
Yes, it creates a frequency shift, a permanent frequency shift, and then you're vibrating differently. You can't go back even to that other frequency because you've changed so much. And some people will say that activation point could be, now we were saying this is speculation. Of course, earlier, this is very much speculation, that a solar flare or some solar event will activate simultaneously the DMT that's in all of our brains. And then when we all go there, we're all having a simultaneous 10 billion human DMT trip, that somehow that will be the frequency shift that we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's some people will say, oh, that sounds far out, but I don't think so. I don't think it sounds far fetched or far out at all. Weirder things have happened.
Way weirder. Especially when you think about how quantum waves can influence the electricity that's in our neurons. I mean, everything's electrical and it's all connected. There's no splice points in energy. It's all connected. And even the Hermeticists will say everything differs by degree. It's all the same thing. The hot, the cold, it's just differed by degree. Now, I want to ask you about this. Do you feel like there is white magic and black magic, or is that totally misinterpreted and misconstrued?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's moralistically construed, because magic in itself, of course, it's a very weird term, right? I've tried to define it as best as I could. And I've come to my own definition right now, which I feel happy with, is that magic is a mind frame that allows for all definitions of itself to pass through it. Meaning, magic is a mind frame that allows all definitions of magic to pass through it in a way, so that it's tolerant, it's self-conscious, but also curious in a way. And then we could say that, does magic require the transcendental experience? I would argue yes, meaning that it's not only causality. And that's my critique of Crowley nowadays, for instance, is that his definition of it is causing change to occur in conformity with will. By logic, then, if I want to get a cup of coffee, I cross the street to the coffee shop. So thereby the crossing of the street is a ritual. But I don't buy. I think that's too bleak, stripped, unromantic, and there's no transcendental experience there. I believe that ritual needs to be charged. It needs to change the mind frame, the psyche. And so basically one extension of, or a combination of those, could be that magic is the when you try to create a change in the outer by consciously working in the inner. By whatever, technology you have, or a ritual, or a ceremony, or something you say, or something you make a sigil or symbolize, but it needs that inner passing, preferably in a transcendental mind frame, to symbolize in your system what you want out there in reality, so-called. So I think that's my definition would be that mind frame, but also that connect. There's no disconnect whatsoever. It's just an open flow between the inner and the outer. And when you have that, then it's very easy to just have a little intention. Let it go from the inside out, instead of spending 1 hour doing a lot of, angelic vibrations or waving your wand in pentagram form. That can work too. But for me personally, that was more like going to college, like going to magic school to understand what forces you're dealing with. But when you come out of that and realize, when you've graduated in a way, you realize that, whoa, it's much more trippy than those causal rituals. It's just, again, like a total holistic approach where, of course, you can change the outer because you're already part of the outer.
Right. And it's really just about that personal dialogue, that personal relationship. And then, as you're saying, the reciprocal energies happening, you're manifesting things. Sure, it's interesting to learn rituals that could create a similar effect, but they're not necessary, and in a way they never were.
Exactly. And then to tie that in then with this unnecessary dichotomy of white and black, meaning, good or bad,
Right.
I don't buy it, because even the concept of cursing people, usually the moralistic approach towards that is that, oh, why do you want to hurt people? But maybe you could rephrase it as saying a curse is not necessarily the negative outcome for that person that irks you or that's done, harm to you. It could be that a curse is actually like a catharsis that rids you of them. Rids your mind or spirit of that kind of psychic vampirism that certain people can have in your life. We've all come across them. And I think that it's necessary for kind of a psychic hygiene to be honest and say that I really do not like that person because that person hurt me. And then you can go, lovey-dovey and try, let's talk about it. Why did you hurt me? Da, 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 da. But some people will never change. So why should you waste your energy on talking to them? It's kind of pointless. So I believe in that what's traditionally seen as, cursing or being, sending magical energy to someone you dislike. I'm all for it, but not necessarily for the sake of, punishing or having that hubristic approach that I can punish people. It's mainly to be rid of it from my own system. It's a cleansing.
And you're sending it back. You're sending it back to where it came.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like holding up a magical mirror, So, okay, here you go. You're sending bad stuff to me. Here's the mirror. Zap. Or any kind of, variation. So what I'm saying is that, it's all in the eyes of the beholder. For someone who is bad, the one who is good will appear bad.
Right.
It's just human dynamics. And I think that magic reflects that, or should reflect that. However, again, I think that where I am at now, I'm more interested in just creating people and, decimating any kind of outer disturbance in terms of, people who are not conducive to anything good for me, or stuff, or my own history, ridding myself or constantly shedding skin so that I'm more perfectly in tune with what I want to achieve in this moment. And for me, mostly it has to do with books, whether writing books or publishing books or some other creative projects. And that brings joy to me. Therefore, I focus on that. And I'm happy to say that at age 58, I have managed to get rid of, and I don't mean that in any illegal way or cursing or anything, but it's gotten rid of a lot of people that really meant nothing to me. They were there for, tradition of I don't know. They've always been around, but that doesn't mean that they always have to be around forever, So people, again, it's like the same thing. You have to be with people because of the resonance you feel.
Right.
If you don't feel resonance, then if you're a very happy, energetic battery kind of person, then the moths will come, or they will see the light and they will try to get a piece of the light. And if you are aware of it, you can absolutely share it and disseminate it, and that can be a part of your work. In a way, I feel like that, but it can also be very draining, and they become little vampires buzzing around you, wanting stuff but not really wanting to give anything back. And I think I'm the reason I'm happy is that I have I think close to none of those anymore. I have had them, but you just need to free yourself of anything that goes against what it is that you want to achieve.
Absolutely, because people are either adding or subtracting. A lot of personal development people talk about that. If they're adding to your energy, that's what you want to be around. But those things that are subtracting, even if they're neutral, they're still creating some sense of a drain, because the people that are adding to your energy, because it's a resonance, like you're saying, they're adding to you. But guess what? You're also adding to them, and the force then amplifies.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think about some of the people that have, since you brought him up, Aleister Crowley, that have these preconceived notions about Aleister Crowley. I've been reading about him for 30 years now, I could say, in my life. And I take a neutral perspective. Some people think he's a vile human being. Some people think he's the greatest spiritual teacher of all time. I kind of stay neutral on the whole thing and just kind of observe. But what do you think about Aleister Crowley? I mean, some people will even say that he got possessed in Egypt by some demon, which then dictated the law of Thelema to him. But as a member of the OTO, you don't believe that. So tell me what you think.
Well, I should state also that I'm a former member of the OTO. I stayed in it for more or less exactly 30 years. And one of the reasons, it is an interesting question. I used to really admire Crowley, love him. But my first epiphany or sort of insight into his psyche and his greatness was not so much via the Book of the Law, which is like the key text that he wrote in Egypt in a kind of a trance state. But it was his so-called hagiography, meaning his biography, Confessions of Aleister Crowley. And that showed me, like I said before, how you can lead your life and make your life very, very magical, meaning open-minded, working with magic, traditional magic. He was a great synthesizer or a syncretist, weaving in stuff from all kinds of places and turning it into his own magical system, which is exactly what you should do. He was a great Thelemite, and his philosophy of Thelema was exactly this, that each and every human being needs to find their own true will and then do it. That's what you need to work with in life. And in a way, he did. I'm sure that had he had another chance, he would have done certain things differently. But he was also a complex character. He wasn't really a people person in the sense that he wasn't good psychologically with dealing with other people. He came from a bubble, an originally wealthy bubble that became a drug bubble and a hubristic magic bubble. So he stayed in some kind of bubble all along, and that meant that he was kind of hard to deal with. However, I do believe he was for real, again, beautiful syncretist, but he had this imprint coming from a fundamentalist Christian upbringing, which he had to rebel against, only natural. So thereby he became, as he called himself, the great beast to pick up mommy and daddy, right? But then what happens then when he had this sort of religious experience or magical experience in Egypt in 1904, then of course he becomes the prophet of a new religion. So it's all this religious neurosis, or one could even argue psychosis, that comes into effect, and he becomes not only like the philosopher who is basically harboring Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, the philosophy of will, but he also weaves in all of this, for me, unnecessary hocus pocus stuff when it's really about, again, the individuation process. And I worked the OTO system, I worked with it, and it was wonderful schooling. Then when it came to the end of my tenure, I could see that the entire environment had changed so much in favor of this religious aspect, Thelema as a religion. I just couldn't buy it because I saw that people were acting just as if they were at church or in synagogue or whatever. They had taken on some kind of religious approach to something that should not be tainted by religious stuff. It's the will, the human will, human individuation. You don't need anything else than that. And it became so ridiculous that people who were in this to develop, again, like define and refine themselves, became little acolytes of even new cult leaders, all worshipping the prophet Crowley. And to me, that's completely paradoxical. It's like an oxymoron. I
kind of feel the same way. And I have friends that are in that mindset, that do treat Crowley like a high priest and they're in a religion. And then, however, I will say that I have friends that are Freemasons that have a completely different experience and a different perspective about Crowley. And I wanted to ask you about this specifically because with 30 years of history into the OTO, you seem like the right person to ask. So I have friends that are Freemasons that claim that Aleister Crowley was a Freemason who then stole the Masonic rituals, recalibrated them to fit his OTO, and that the OTO is kind of this darker, artificial version of Freemasonry. Now, I'm just asking this as a neutral question. I don't have any attachment to it, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's taken one step too far, I think. Basically, he got his Freemasonic degrees in different places. So he was technically a Freemason, I think, in the Scottish Rite. But then there was also what he stole was from, if you could call it that, from the Golden Dawn. And those rituals are basically old Rosicrucian esoteric modifications that they worked in the Golden Dawn, and they were, secret. But what he did was he published them in the Equinox series of books. So that was the cause of a ruckus and disruption, and he left, or he had to leave, and they were, it was bad blood. So that's something that he actually took when he was not allowed to. However, when it comes to the OTO already existed before him. It was a German Freemasonic order that also allowed women in, because they worked with secrets or rituals coming from, the East. That sounds so mythological and romantic. Basically, mysteries of a sexual nature. That was already in place when Crowley came into the picture. And the reason that was kind of, it's been mythologized about Crowley had written and exposed or written about the very secret of the OTO in one of his quasi-poetic mystical books called The Book of Lies, and that the leader of the OTO contacted him and they became friendly and Crowley got involved. But basically what Crowley did was infuse the already existing OTO with Thelema, with the philosophy of Thelema coming from the Book of the Law. And he also infused it in a couple of other orders and created his own Golden Dawn, the AA, which had the same initiatory structure. So I don't think Crowley stole anything. He published the Golden Dawn rituals, which was not okay according to the Golden Dawn. But Crowley didn't need any permissions. He was a rebel and did whatever he wanted. He was kind of a chaotic person.
He did have that personality.
I think with the OTO is he added to, but he didn't steal anything away. The OTO existed before, and then it became an official Thelemic fraternal order that also allowed for women. Yeah, I
see. But why, in your magical journeying and your magical teachings, did you not really dive into the world of Freemasonry or become a Freemason? Is it not as authentic as some of these other magical schools?
No, I don't. I think it can be for certain people, and I do believe that there's some kind of magic in there. But I never felt attracted to it, initially, and that's again like my initial movements were based in my own intuitive directions. Right. I was immersed in a certain culture, and I was kind of a little occultural detective, seeing what's behind the band. What is this reference? That magician recommended that, so I'll check that out. I connected the dots in my own little universe, and there was nothing appealing for me in my, understanding of Freemasonry at the time. I think I got the gist of the structure and the initiatory mysteries actually in the OTO, because they are the rites of Memphis and Mitzrayim, and those first grade degrees, they're fairly, contain the same mysteries regardless of which rite you're in, basically. So I think that that gave me a notion of what it would be like, and I needed more powerful stuff, and I already had more powerful stuff because I was infused with it at such an early age or early formatting of my magical persona that became my all-round persona by that first trip to the US and my contacts with, getting letters from Burroughs and LaVey and Kenneth Anger, and working with Genesis P-Orridge for, 34 years in total. And some other magicians too. But it was just, felt like I was with them, riding, what do you call it? Like, not riding a high wire, or it was just basically filled with a strong energy, like riding a very fast car, which was pumping out great music, great culture. And I had no need of that kind of serenity of a fraternal organization.
Oh, interesting. Wow. I find myself personally, when I think of Freemasonry, I find myself personally attracted to Manly P. Hall. I love his lectures.
Yeah, of course.
He's incredible. He's a Freemason, so perhaps there's something there. However, he was one of the people that was initiated directly to the 33rd degree. I've heard that about Aleister Crowley, but I've never verified that. But Manly P. Hall was definitely just like straight to the top because he was already so versed in those things.
Yeah, no, he was an amazing person and a great source of inspiration for me. Absolutely. That kind of mind that can collect, analyze, and also reformulate. That's my ideal.
Well, Carl, I'm looking at our clock here, and we have had a very long, beautiful, in sync conversation. I feel like that third mind did appear. I looked over like, oh my God, it's been an hour and 45 minutes. I really appreciate your time. This has been amazing.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, it's we're unstoppable. Only the clock can stop us temporarily.
Exactly. Literally, we could probably go for hours. I haven't even talked about sigils yet, but I just want to ask you, because I know we only have a limited amount of time here. I want to ask you, sigils. People know about sigils. If you studied magic, you can create these symbols that then you can charge and focus your energy in a way that then can manifest that thing. Are memes, modern memes that we look at on the internet, are they a form of a sigil? Because they're seemingly charged by the person that's creating the meme, whether it's to make a joke or criticize someone or point out an absurdity. There's some sort of psychic charge that goes along with the creation of that meme, and then it goes out and has an effect on people. In your opinion, are these modern memes a form of a sigil?
No, they're not. They're rather the form of a kind of an offspring to the psychology of commercial advertising, or propaganda in a way, where you send out messages, repeatedly and get feedback on them, so that they take on, quite literally a life of their own. But it's not really the same thing. The sigil is something that is hyper personal and should be left alone to work in your unconscious mind in order to manifest whatever it is that is contained in that graphic little symbol. A meme is another small part, but it's not really supposed to be unconscious, right? It conveys a message that is meant to be seen, meant to affect right away. So I see it more as an expletion, that someone expletes something, and it may be coded, codified. It may contain symbols. It may contain weird senses of humor that are become like in jokes for a certain crowd of people, thus gluing a group together. But for me, it's not the same thing. I've heard that theory, absolutely. But for me, a sigil is very much, it needs to be symbolized. That's something that is not interpretable by those on the outside. It's something so personal.
Right. Like a person would see somebody's personal sigil, which is an unbroken design, and they would have no idea what that meant unless they knew the person personally.
Exactly.
That makes
There is,
way more sense.
this thing in commercial advertising. People talk about logos. There was usually a logo is a logo type, right? That's written in type in a certain aesthetic. That's like a brand name that becomes something that people recognize. That's important in commercial advertising. There's also something called a logo mark. That has more of the kind of a kinship with sigils. A logo mark is a symbol of a corporation, a symbol of a political party, like the elephant or the
donkey,
the ass, the donkey. Yeah, exactly. They're logo marks of those entire worlds. So in that sense. But they're not cryptic. They're not individual. They are meant to be recognized. That's why they're a logo mark, a mark of the word that is contained there. But again, a sigil for magical purposes, it's much more personal. I would say that the word maga, for instance, maga is a logo type that is quite magical because it had a cultic effect. Yes. On that crowd, it was definitely a kind of a religious thing, and they knew the people who came up with it were, of course, aware of that. Meaning, no, it wasn't only the slogan "Make America Great Again." That's just another inane slogan, but the way they packed it in, and so people talked about MAGA, MAGA, MAGA. It became like a magical mantra.
I know. I thought of that as well, especially when you realize the ma, you're thinking mother. There's like that energy in the sound. There was definitely some magic there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Make no mistake, absolutely. And whether conscious or not, I don't know. I think these people are very skilled in branding and commercial advertising and in swaying large groups of people. And they obviously did a good job, for good or bad.
We'll find out, I guess, as the linear time progresses. And speaking of linear time, oh my God, again, we could just keep going. I could feel our conversation every time we talk. We could just go outside of time. But I want to ask you, this is probably the closing question. You've met all of these magical people. You've traveled all over the world. You have decades of experience. You learned so much. What do you think the most powerful or most necessary magical thing is? Like, what do the people of Earth need to know that you've learned from all of these experiences?
Yeah, I think that would be the something that needs to be experienced. Like it can be, of course, disseminated in writing and with words of wisdom, but it's something that should be experienced, and that is an epiphanic, transcendental experience. Where you not only feel, but when you realize on all levels that you are connected to the totality. That can be brought about in many different ways. And I would, from the like super straight PC and normal and, just all around safe thing, I would say, meditation and yoga can take you to that. And also being out in nature, of course, immerse yourself in the beauty of nature and the power of nature. If I drift slightly ajar or afar from that, I would say maybe have some kind of psychedelic experience and see where that takes you if you haven't already. But if you have, that those moments are within reach. It's all set and setting. You shouldn't plan for it, but you should allow for the experience to be potential, to not have disturbances, to hone or cultivate the possible experience of experiencing something beyond the normal mind frame, and see where that takes you. Or it could also be in ecstasy by physical exercise, or even in sex, or in magical ritual, or even within traditional religions. A sense of awe can take you to a deeper understanding that goes beyond the shallow religiousness of the religious systems. But they can be gateways also. They can be door openers also to a much more direct should we say, gnostic experience
Yes.
of the universe and how you're connected to it.
So find those places where you can have the transcendental experience, whether it's psychedelics, connection with nature, meditation, yoga, whatever it is, whatever suits you, your frequency, find that and explore that, because that direct experience is going to be the catalyst for your growth.
Absolutely. And it contains, inherently contains a lot of magic in the life after you have experienced that, integrated it, and taken it seriously, so that will be like the fuel of your vehicle instead of something else.
Yes, because when we change our frequency in those ways, we absolutely change the frequency of the earth, and everything, probably the entire universe changes.
Exactly. And, you know, that thing, it's a beautiful thing. Change begins at home. I think the best way to change other people is not by hammering in things or even, you know, be too vocal about your stuff. It's simply by inspiring them, because when you're harmonious and joyous and feel at one, you know, with whatever it is that you're doing, you will inspire other people. And you shouldn't inspire them to be, you know, emulators or little mimics of your own, but you should just inspire them to be themselves. That's the real message.
Yes, and that's the purpose of it all, to inspire others. So hopefully we can get to that place of love, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. Wow, Carl, we've had such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot, Jake.
We definitely need to have you back at some point soon. That was incredible. And I want to tell people where to find you. CarlAbrahamsson.com is his website. You can go there. You'll find out about him. His most recent book, Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, Life in the Occult Underground, is available wherever you get books. Please read about this person's life. It's magical.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. And please hold through the outro music. And everyone, I guess we can say this has been our most magical episode. And we will see you next week. Midnight on Earth.